Hey, welcome to Headline Busters, last episode of the year, brought to you by The Point. I'm Li Qiuyuan, sitting in for Liu Xin. Over the next 30 minutes, I'll be dissecting more China-related stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to my panel to bring you the missing pieces of the China puzzle. So join us in real time by sending us your comments or questions via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, as well as Weibo. If you're watching this live on the CGTN app, email us at thepointwithlx@cgtn.com. Let me know what you think. We start our live streaming every Friday at 10:30 a.m. Beijing time, so do get in touch and we might just read out your comments. So the topic of this week, China's alleged use of forced foreign labor at Shanghai's Qingpu Prison. The controversy began when a 6-year-old British girl, Florence Widdicombe, recently opened a box of Tesco charity Christmas cards and discovered a seemingly desperate message inside one of them. It read, "We are foreign prisoners in Shanghai Qingpu Prison, China, forced to work against our will. Please help us and notify human rights organization." Well, the card also specifically urged the recipient to contact Mr. Peter Humphrey, a former British journalist who actually served time in a Chinese prison during 2014 and 2015. Now, according to media reports, China had accused and convicted Humphrey of illegally accessing the private information of Chinese citizens. And as for Florence Widdicombe's family, from their home in South London, her father contacted Humphrey, who himself wrote a story for the Sunday Times. Now, the story was soon picked up by other Western media outlets. And in response to the sensational claim, the general manager of the Chinese factory, identified by the Western media, told China's Global Times newspaper the company doesn't even hire foreigners, and 80% of its employees are Chinese citizens. From East China's Zhejiang province, it read, "We have never had any connection with any prison," the general manager said, asserting that his company reserves the right to sue any media outlet that publishes such spurious claims. Then, on Monday, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said it had sought information from relevant government departments and concluded that this accusation was nothing but a, quote, drama choreographed by Peter Humphrey himself, I should say. Now, a government spokesperson also challenged Humphrey's credibility as a former prisoner and said he's simply publicity hungry. And as for Tesco, following the allegations, the company accused this past Sunday that it had suspended production at its Chinese factory. The global supermarket chain also said that they have withdrawn this Christmas product from their shelves until further notice. So these are the two sides of the story. But whether the allegations are true or farce, you can decide by yourself. We trust our viewers' judgment. Sadly, though, some Western media don't share this view. So let's take a look at how they have reported on this story. Again, the story was first reported by the British newspaper, the Sunday Times, but in a piece written by Peter Humphrey himself. And that's part of the problem. Now, Western journalists are typically taught to never make themselves the story unless they're directly, uniquely involved with it, in which case your editor may allow you to switch from the standard, neutral, detached voice as if you were an invisible chronicler of reality to writing in the first person. So from he, she, they to I, me, we. However, while this Time story looks very much like a normal news report, it's really a first-person commentary, if not a diatribe. In fact, though the author's name is atop the piece in tiny print, it's only well down into the piece, following one large photograph, a large graphic, and 5 long paragraphs. The reader is eventually struck by a stunning revelation. The author, Humphrey, actually plays a central role in this alleged drama. Now, this clearly is irresponsible journalism and a disservice to readers. If publishing such a piece, the media outlet must blare out loudly from the top for readers to know that the author is writing about his own experience, his own views, from his own perspectives, through his lens of bias. But instead, the unsuspecting reader is hit with this headline: Tesco charity cards packed by China's prison slaves. The headline itself is incredibly pejorative. Instead of a factual approach to highlight the experience of this one girl finding this note, which was allegedly written by a prisoner in China, it jumps to the conclusion the story is true. Moreover, it uses the highly provocative term, slaves. Similarly, Humphrey later likens China's prison system to gulags, which for many readers would surely conjure up Stalin's Soviet Union. The article goes on to say the Christmas cry for help from a Shanghai prison has turned an embarrassing spotlight on Tesco's relationship with its Chinese suppliers and their use of forced prison labor. Now, the use of a Christmas cry for help is hugely loaded language as it tugs at the reader's emotional sensibilities during the holiday season. Humphrey later explains his version of why he was jailed in China. My activities upset the Chinese government, which jailed both me and my American wife, Yu Yingzeng, on bogus charges that were never heard in court. For its part, China says he was imprisoned for illegally accessing the private information of Chinese citizens. Yet by now, Humphrey's experience in China is almost beside the point. Regardless of what he will allege in the rest of his piece, the damage is done. His perspective is understandably biased. Yet the Times has failed to fully, appropriately inform its audience about this bias. Even more outrageous than the Times piece was a follow-up article in the Daily Mail, which is Britain's third largest paper, reportedly with a circulation of more than 1.2 million. Now, from the outset in the headlines, the newspaper also embraces the entire story as fact. The cart that showed the hidden cost behind too many Chinese Christmas bargains. Note that the cart didn't hint at a hidden cost. Instead, it showed it as if it's factually revealing it, it's exposing it. Now, throughout the piece, there isn't the slightest bit of hedging or doubt with some of the terms that fair, ethical journalists usually employ, like allegedly, reportedly, or accused of. Now, such words signal humility to the audience usually. We ourselves don't know this to be fact. All we know is that others are alleging. But instead, this journalist, Dominic Lawson, states it also matter-of-factly as if he knows the story to be true. Yet he himself hasn't even investigated it. Now, the real outrage, though, is how Lawson takes this one Christmas card incident, only allegedly tied to Chinese prison labor, and uses it as a springboard to libel China's entire toy industry and even to slime the entire manufacturing sector of the world's largest exporter. So just look at the language deployed here. Again, in headlines, it's not just this one gift, but, quote, too many Chinese Christmas bargains. In other words, any of the Christmas gifts that you bought or received could be tainted this way. The opening paragraph uses scary language as well. What if some of the toys you bought were, quote, made in concentration camps? Just as many British readers associate gulags with the Soviets, they will think concentration camps to the Nazis. So we're just one paragraph in, and readers may actually wonder if they're unwitting supporters of what? Crimes against humanity? And several paragraphs later, the defamation continues. Toys, the products that we must associate with innocence and happiness, are dominated by Chinese suppliers. About 8 in every 10 of the world's toys are made in the People's Republic of China, and the UK is thought to take about 10% of the toys exported from there. Yet we know little and perhaps care even less about why they're so cheap to buy. So from this one girl's incident, Lawson is now extrapolating wildly and implying that the world may be infested by such Chinese-made toys. The underlying message here is an appeal to the reader's morality, too. Products from China are made with slave labor, and you must stop buying them. At the same time, Lawson manages to dehumanize the Chinese. Well, China has a huge, dynamic manufacturing industry supporting millions of jobs. Go to any town or city across the country, you will come across ordinary Chinese people who aren't slaves, but working hard for a decent salary and earning an honest living. Yet even from this underhandedness, the journalist takes the piece into a darker direction. For another 1,000 words, he gratuitously throws the proverbial kitchen sink of Western accusations against China, from alleging the persecution of China's Christian community and the Uyghur Muslim minority of Xinjiang. Lawson cites the recent controversy surrounding the Premier League footballer Mesut Ozil. He compares China to Stalin's Soviet Union, and he revives the accusation that China steals vital organs from prisoners still alive. As if his point isn't clear enough, he finishes the piece with this line. But the real-life question for parents is, do you want to source Christmas toys or cards from such a regime? Well, this is more than mere China bashing. His loathing of China oozes from nearly every paragraph, transforming the initial news story into full-blown incitement of hatred against the Chinese. So, that's all the news articles we have for this week. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts. Join me after the break when I'll be joined by Wang Cong, reporter of the Global Times, Einar Tangen, our current affair commentator, to discuss this week's headlines. Don't go away.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. it has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to this week's Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. Joining us on the set today to talk about the headlines this week are Mr. Wang Cong, reporter at the Global Times, and Einar Tangen, our current affair commentator. Always a pleasure to have you on. Now, before we start our discussion, we're now joined live in Shanghai by my colleague Lin Nan. She actually visited the Chinese factory and did a report on this. Good to see you there, Lin Nan. So tell us more about this. What have you learned about this controversy? How did the company respond to the accusations of forced labor?
Well, Chuyan, I visited Yunguang Company, the manufacturer of the Christmas card, on Tuesday and spoke with their chairman. The chairman was very angry at the accusation, calling it completely fabricated and denied any business links with the Qingpu Prison. And he said the batch of the Christmas cards were made in Yunguang Company in all processes, from printing to packing, then putting into containers for export. And he could definitely say that all of them were made by the Chinese people, and there were no chance of writing anything on cards because workers were not allowed to bring pens into the workshop. So all the coverage were not based on facts at all. Julia.
So what's your reaction to all of this and what has Lin Nan just said?
Well, I think the most important point that people should be concentrating on that is this factory uses an automated packaging line. It does not send the toys out to some place which would cause shipping and to have them packaged and sent back. And it'd be quite easily verifiable because you can look at the packaging itself. So that seems to suggest that there were ulterior motives. You know, how is it possible that you know, this note shows up, some little girl, then to, you know, Peter Humphrey. I've known him for many, many years. In fact,
personally?
Yes, I have. And
so how would you describe this person?
I would describe him as a throwback to a time when a little bit of Chinese and this idea that you have some connections and being a foreigner could make you very wealthy in China. But times moved on. The days when expats could kind of wander around and break the rules are gone. Everything is now normalized. You have to bring something to China. You have to have a skill or a set of, you know, money or whatever it is. So those days are gone, and unfortunately not all the people who thought that they were entitled to have this kind of colonial existence have left. As I've often said to people, some of the worst people I've met in China are expats. And I'm not saying that all expats are bad. I'm one myself. I'm just saying that there was a time in China when there were a lot of people here who couldn't be anywhere else for various reasons, or were not really wanted anywhere else. So I'm not saying that I don't know how Peter got here. He described different stories and things like that. But he is somebody who, if you read through his background notes, has a definite grudge against China. He's only known, really, famously, for being incarcerated and giving a tearful confession about all the things that he did wrong. And then afterwards, after being released for compassionate concerns regarding his health, he went back to England. He wrote a book and described how he had been victimized. He doesn't really discuss in great detail the kind of activities that he was up to. He was supposedly an investigator. He would go in and go through, you know, people's garbage, he said, and figure out what was going on. He'd use his, quote, connections through his Chinese wife, although she's American. She was born in China. Her father was a prominent person here. And he would always tell people exactly who her father was and what that meant in terms of being protected in the kind of business that he was in.
So having known his history with China, his character, how would you say the credibility of the report he wrote? I mean, the Foreign Ministry of China actually responded saying that this whole thing, this whole controversy, is choreographed by Humphrey himself. What do you think?
Well, let's see the facts. The facts are that there was no way to put a note in the package if you were a prisoner somewhere else, because at the factory, it's an automated line. So how would a note get in there? So it brings real questions as to the credibility of this entire story. I can't say that Peter made it up, but I can't, you know, where is this little girl? Who are these people? Why is this related? Why do they bring in Falun Gong? I mean, it's kind of a mixture of things. But the thing that I really dislike, and we're all involved in journalism, is this idea that you take some small thing and you say, oh, this could be true. And then the next report is, it is true. And then from that, it becomes a springboard to a diatribe about what is people wanted to say, to their deepest fears, to their emotions, to pandering to people. And this is not only about China. This is about the political process that's going on around the world. You can see it in Hong Kong. You can see it throughout the United States in the political things, what's happening in Great Britain. So this is something that is unique to social media, this idea that I can take one thing and then expand it, and through repetition, insist that it's true, as opposed to doing any real investigation.
Well, I guess the key takeaway here is that these cars are actually made by robots. But before I get to your thoughts, let's take a look at the comment from our viewers. This is from Facebook. So We Watch Chain Truckroll says, I'm not pro-China, but Western news like this coming from notoriously unreliable Daily Mail are more hate crime than news. What do you think?
Well, I mean, for me, the most outrageous part of this is not that, you know, this story, the Sunday Times story, is, you know, against any journalistic rule in, you know, in the Western society or in China. And it's not that, you know, all the other Western media jumped on all over it, you know, without any verification. It's this, that this kind of type of fabrication, this type of news story have consequences. Yesterday we talked to the general manager of that factory.
Oh, you did?
And he had a headache. Because why? After these stories broke, you know, Tesco and Disney and Cotton On from Australia have all started inspections into these production lines and suspended. That company has about, you know, less than 200 workers, and they're 70% of their businesses, you know, foreign related. So if these companies are pressured to cut ties with this factory, that means their business is in danger, and that means those people, those workers, ordinary Chinese workers who earns about, you know, 4,000 a month, will lose their job. So these type of things, yes, they can, you know, like we've seen this all the time. This is a pattern for the, you know, Western media that whenever, you know, it comes to China, they jump on stories without any fact, without any, you know, balance. But these kind of things has consequences. You know, it seems like they want to promote, you know, to improve the quality of the working condition in China, right? You know, that's the thing. Do you want to buy things, you know, assembled by slaves? These are not slaves. These are ordinary Chinese people who try to make ends meet, who, you know, who assemble. I personally know people from my hometown work in, you know, in the manufacturing hubs in the east part of China to make a living. That's all their income. And they're describing that as slaves, forced labor. It's just ridiculous. Well, and also, like, you know, Einar said, these are not people making this anymore. Yes, you know, it's like almost like seasonal, you know, when it comes to Christmas. The anti-China campaign, smear campaign, comes to the made-in-China products. These are cheap. But they don't know it's cheap, not because it's the laborers are forced or it's cheap labor. It's because of China's complete industrial value chain and you know, the automation that makes these kind of things cheap, not because, you know, somebody's exploiting. So it's just ridiculous, I think. Yeah.
You were saying?
No, I completely agree. I mean, there are consequences to this. You know, when you have an irresponsible story like that is spread, now all of a sudden all Chinese toys are under suspect. The reason that the Chinese dominate the industry is because initially, as you said, there was this labor dividend. Then it became a supply chain issue. But there's another factor. Chinese companies operate on very, very small margins. I would venture to say that this toy manufacturer is probably between 3 and 5%, especially if he's working for these large entities like Costco, because they come in and they try to push the price down as much as possible. And, you know, given that, anything like this is tragic. It is absolutely certain to ruin his business and all the people that are there. So from a situation where there's an allegation irresponsibly not followed up, you're going to have real tragedies, Christmas tragedies, for the families and people who work there.
This is what irresponsible journalism could do.
And they, they hide behind the hypocrisy where, they actually care about human rights in China or, the working conditions of ordinary Chinese. But what they're doing, with regards to stories in Xinjiang and others, they're not helping. They actually hurting them, in this specific case. Really, if Disney, all these companies cut, those workers will lose their jobs, will lose their paycheck.
Now, here's another comment. This is from YouTube. So Bird of Paradise says this is just another fake from the Western media about China, but this time was involved with the UK, China, Tesco. Tesco just trying to promote its brand. Don't expect the Western media to be nice when it comes to China. Don't expect to be nice.
That's true, I will have to say. But also, I was saying that, this company would be affected. But when it comes to, look at the Huawei case, right? There's also a positive aspect of this. Because if, those things will come out to light, the facts. That, when the U.S. started the campaign against Huawei, on national security grounds, people would believe it. But after all this, 2 years, it's been 2 years, there's no evidence. So Huawei's actually global brand awareness has been boosted. They have started their own innovation. So when it comes to manufacturing, same thing. Yes, they have been, this is not the first time they target China's manufacturing sector. But at the end of the day, no one can make these things better or cheaper than China does. And obviously, they will have to rely on this.
Let's not conflate this as to what we have is an individual who came forward with a story who seems to have a grudge against China, all right, for his own bad actions. All right. He was the one who made this story. And I agree with you. The willingness of people in the press and in the West generally to believe anything bad about China is making the gulf wider. You are not going to have a peaceful world if everybody is trying to divide against each other. If in Washington they decide that energy policy for Europe should be decided in Congress, not necessarily in Germany or France or the EU. These are the kinds of things which in this, you cannot set standards for yourself and say that I'm going to rule everybody else. It's not going to work. There has to be a little bit of understanding. Now, in this particular case, this factory owner, I'm a lawyer, he should engage counsel and see exactly, there's a note, there's physical evidence, there's a way to investigate this. Based on that, in the British courts, he would be able, if he's able to prove this, to get a substantial penalty from whoever was behind it. And I think that is very important. Remember Lee Kuan Yew, all right? Everyone lionizes him now, but I mean, back in the day, he used the courts very effectively to go against those people who made unfounded allegations, or what he found are unfounded allegations against him. So Chinese companies need to start using the Western ways to make sure that they are being justly served and not, unjustly punished.
But I mean, that's the problem. If it's a massive company like Huawei, they can't afford that because I mean the legal litigation process is very
but
expensive.
I'm saying
this is a small factory.
This is a situation where I would hope a good Chinese law firm who has experience in this, or a non-Chinese law firm who's just interested in justice, would step forward and say, we will take this case, we will hire investigators to make sure this is done. I'm sure the story about it being debunked will be completely passed over if that's true. I'm sure there'll be no apology given by any of the newspapers involved. But for this, right now, the only thing we can think about are these 200 workers and the factory that's going to close.
If these things result in that, because just yesterday Disney, did a unannounced, inspection. The general manager was furious, because this it's normal for foreign contractors to do, unannounced inspections, but because of the scrutiny from these news reports, there are more. And these companies, Tesco has been working with this company for 10 years without any problem. And they said, we have to point this out, just last month, they conducted a review that showed no evidence, and these Christmas cards were made way before last month.
That's why the subject.
So it's just, it doesn't make any sense. And now Cotton On and Disney, those are big clients, and they face pressure. They might cut ties not because they have issue with the factory. They had, you know, they closed ties because of this pressure, you know, they put on. I mean, in the piece, it's very clear that they were targeting Tesco, right? You know, they're targeting Tesco, saying, "Wow, you are evil because you're working with a company who's also evil." And then now the Daily Mail piece was about consumers, right? Wow, if you buy these, then you're also evil.
And they're making these sweeping generalizations, not only
exactly,
about toys, but all products made in China.
But one unfounded story written by somebody who has a grudge, all right, is used to vilify not only these workers in this factory, but an entire country.
But why is it even picked up by all the major news outlets? I mean, shouldn't they provide any evidence, fact check when they decided to run the story?
No, I mean, for example, it's a little bit hard to verify the authenticity of that note or any. I understand that, you know, from a journalist perspective.
We're in this business.
However, there's a couple of things you can do. For example, for the BBC and other news outlets that picked up this, you have to reach out to the company is in question. Nobody talked to the general manager before the Global Times, and they have to reach out to the prison, right? That's also in question.
Least you should do that.
You don't see no voice. Even if they decline to comment, they can put in another piece. That's the basic, that's the minimum they have to do to pick up this story, but none of them did. They took it as its face value, as it is a truth, and they describe that and they make a commentary based on that. So it's like a snowball, you know, that a small piece of Christmas card becomes now a story that threatens the jobs of 200 people.
And it's holiday season. I mean, have they used the fact that it's Christmas to play on people's emotions?
Seasonal thing,
well, if the story is to be believed, it's the source probably, whoever was behind this, probably thought this is the right time to do it because it would grab headlines.
Well, what do you think is the eventual purpose there, the ultimate purpose there to choreograph this whole thing? If
Well,
the story
I don't know what the purpose seems quite clear, to vilify China, all right?
And to hurt business, maybe,
and to draw attention to Peter Humphrey. And, you know, and all the things he's done. He's been looking for a pedestal to talk about his experience quite some time. His books, he writes articles, he writes to people in China constantly, telling about how terrible it was. But it's all kind of in me. It was all I was victimized, this type of thing. I'm very highly suspect. This is somebody who's supposed to be a trained journalist. Right? He's not somebody who's just speaking. If he wanted to do this story, he could have contacted any one of these news things and said, listen, here are the facts. You can interview me. You can interview this little girl. You can attempt to have some journalistic integrity and call the factory and things like this. And that would have been a story. As it was, it just seems like it's pandering to this anti-China feeling, which is sweeping across the world. Since 2016, all right, there has been a huge uptick in anti-Chinese stories. Nothing has really changed since 2016, just the perception being pushed by the media.
Yeah, we're going to have to leave it there, running out of time. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and insights. Wang Cong joining us here, and our Einar Tangen, our current affair commentator. And that does it for this edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. Join us same time next Friday. Let us what you think. Email us, reach out to us. We'd like to get your thoughts. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.
That's all.